Welcome to Revenge Stories with Father, where real stories of family, sacrifice, and hard-won dignity find their voice. These are the moments that test what we're made of and what we refuse to accept. When I asked my son about the housewarming date, his wife said, "We already had it. It was for our kind of people." 2 weeks later, she called me, "The bank is asking about the cosigner. Did you do something?" I told her, "Didn't I mention that back in March?" I never planned to become the kind of father who keeps score. For 61 years, I lived by one simple rule. You take care of your family, no matter what it costs you. My father taught me that. His father taught him. It wasn't written anywhere. It was just understood. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 34 years as a union electrician in Columbus, Ohio. I climbed into attics in July heat and crawled through basements in February cold. I wore out 2 pairs of work boots a year and came home smelling like copper wire and sweat every single night. My wife, Norma, never once complained about that. She'd hand me a cold beer at the door and ask about my day like I'd just come back from some office somewhere. That woman was the best thing that ever happened to me, and losing her to ovarian cancer 8 years ago left a hole in my life that nothing has ever filled. Our son Wesley was 26 when Norma died. He took it hard, we both did, for a year after. It was just the two of us figuring out how to exist without her. We ate bad takeout at my kitchen table and watched baseball games we didn't pay attention to. That year brought us closer than we'd been since he was a teenager, and I thought, foolishly, it turns out, that it would always be that way between us. Wesley met Tara at a company retreat about 18 months after Norma passed. She worked in corporate communications, which I later understood meant she was very good at saying the right things to the right people. She was polished in a way that Norma never needed to be, with a laugh that always seemed calculated for the room rather than for the moment. I told myself I was being unfair, a grieving father looking for reasons to hold on to his son. I made myself like her. They got engaged 14 months later. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, just over $4,000 at a steakhouse downtown, because that was the tradition and because I wanted to. At the wedding, I gave a toast that made people cry, including Wesley. Tara smiled at me from across the room. It seemed real. Then they moved to Denver for her job. At first, the distance just felt like geography. Wesley called every Sunday, same as always. We talked about the Buckeyes, about whatever project I was consulting on since I'd semi-retired, about whether I needed help around the house. Those calls were easy and familiar, and I held on to them. But somewhere in the first year, something shifted. The Sunday calls started getting shorter. Then they started getting skipped. I'd call and get voicemail, and Wesley would text back, "Sorry, Dad, busy weekend. Talk soon." The talk soon calls came less and less. By the second year in Denver, I noticed a pattern I didn't want to see. Wesley called me when he needed to talk through a financial decision or when he had a question about electrical work in their new place. Those calls lasted 30-40 minutes. The other calls, the ones where I asked how he was doing, how Tara was, whether they had plans to come back to Ohio, those lasted 7 minutes, maybe 10. I started timing them without meaning to. I want to be fair here. Wesley wasn't cruel. He wasn't dismissive the way some sons get when they marry into a different social world. He was just absent. Not in miles, but in presence. Like he'd become a polite acquaintance who shared my last name. The first real signal came at Christmas, 2 years after the wedding. I drove out to Denver, 14 hours, because I don't fly, never have, to spend the holiday with them. They lived in a new development in the suburbs, the kind of neighborhood where every lawn looks the same and the houses have 3-car garages. I pulled up in my 2009 F-150 and parked next to a brand new Audi SUV that I assumed belonged to guests. It was Tara's. The house was beautiful. More than beautiful. It was the kind of house that required a particular income to maintain. I'm not naive about money. I've managed my own carefully for 3 decades. And what I saw in that house told me they were spending significantly more than 2 salaries in their mid-30s should comfortably allow. There were pieces of furniture I recognized from magazines Norma used to read. There was a kitchen renovation that had clearly just been finished. There was a wine refrigerator that cost more than my first truck. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my business. What was my business was the afternoon of Christmas Eve when I overheard Tara on the phone in the kitchen while I was coming down the hall. She didn't hear me coming. "He's fine," she was saying. "He's just, you know, Wesley's dad. He means well." There was a pause. "No, he drove." "Of course he drove. In that truck." She laughed softly. I stood in the hallway for a moment, then turned around and went back to the guest room. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the identical houses across the street, and I thought about Norma, about what she would have said if she'd heard that conversation. She would have said, "Eddie, don't you dare let that woman make you feel small." Norma was direct that way. I stayed through New Year's. I helped Wesley fix a drainage problem in the backyard that had been bothering him for weeks. We worked side by side for 2 days, and it felt, for those 2 days, like things were the way they used to be. When I left, he hugged me at the door with real feeling, and I drove home telling myself I'd imagined the drift. By spring, I'd stopped imagining it. Wesley called me in April, a Sunday, which surprised me, and told me they'd bought a lot in a new development outside Denver. A builder development, custom homes, the kind where you pick everything from the countertops to the doorknobs. He was excited in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. I was happy for him. "How were you financing it?" I asked. "Because I'm his father, and that's the kind of question I ask." "Combination," he said. "Construction loan, then it converts to a mortgage." "But Dad, there's something I wanted to ask you. The bank is looking for a co-signer to strengthen the application. With my business ownership stake in Tara's variable compensation, the loan officer said a co-signer with steady income history would help a lot. I thought about it. I had the income history, a solid credit score, and money in reserve. I also had the instinct, the one that had served me for 30 years on job sites, that told me when something wasn't quite right. But I ignored the instinct because he was my son and I loved him, and because I thought maybe this was what he needed to feel settled. Stability. A real home. "Send me the paperwork," I said. I co-signed a construction to permanent loan for $340,000. I want you to understand what that number meant to me. It meant that if Wesley and Tara defaulted, the bank would come after me. It meant my retirement savings, the account Norma and I had built together over 25 years, would be at risk. I signed because I trusted my son. Full stop. After I signed, I also quietly moved $60,000 into a dedicated savings account, money I had set aside specifically to give Wesley when the house was finished. A housewarming gift, a down payment supplement to reduce his mortgage burden, the kind of thing my father would have done if he'd had the means. I didn't tell Wesley about the $60,000 yet. I wanted to surprise him at the housewarming. Construction took 11 months. During that time, I called Wesley every 3 weeks or so. He updated me on the progress, flooring choices, fixture selections, landscaping plans. The calls were warmer than they'd been in a while. I told myself the house was bringing us back together. The house was completed in late September. I found out about the housewarming from my nephew, Rick, who lived in Denver. Rick had been invited. He'd been friends with Wesley since they were kids, and he assumed I knew. He called me on a Monday morning the week after the party. "Great time at Wesley's place Saturday," he said. "That house is something else. Did you have a good drive out?" I hadn't been there. I hadn't been invited. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that call. The coffee in my mug went cold. I looked at the photograph on my refrigerator, the one from Wesley's college graduation, the two of us with our arms around each other, Norma between us, all three of us squinting into the sun. It had been up there for 12 years. I called Wesley that evening. "Dad," he answered. He sounded relaxed, still riding whatever good feeling the weekend had left behind. "I heard the housewarming was this weekend," I said. "Rick mentioned it." Silence. Just long enough to tell me everything. Then I heard Tara's voice in the background, that same measured, controlled tone, and a moment later, she was the one talking to me. "I hope you understand. It wasn't really a family event. It was more of a professional gathering. Wesley's colleagues, people from our network. We kept it to people in our circle." I didn't say anything right away. I was sitting in the same chair where I'd paid my bills for 20 years, the chair where I'd sat when the hospital called about Norma, the chair where I'd signed the cosigner documents for Wesley's house. I see, I finally said. I'm sure Wesley will have you out soon for a proper visit, she continued. It just made more sense to keep the guest list curated for the opening. You understand. Curated. The word landed like a splinter. Of course, I said. I understand completely. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my house for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I got out a yellow legal pad, the kind I used on job sites for calculating load requirements, and I started writing things down. On one side, everything I'd given. I'd co-signed a $340,000 loan. I'd contributed $4,000 toward the rehearsal dinner. I'd given $10,000 as a wedding gift. Cash. I'd flown, actually, driven, which took longer and cost more in gas, to Denver twice in the past 2 years when Wesley needed help with things. I had $60,000 sitting in an account, earmarked for him. And I'd done something harder to quantify. I'd been available. Every Sunday call, every voicemail returned, every question answered at 10 o'clock at night when he was stressed about something. I had never once made him feel like a burden. On the other side, the return. I couldn't fill the column. That night I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Patricia who'd handled my estate planning after Norma passed. I told her I needed to discuss the co-signer arrangement and whether there was anything I could or should do. The second call was to my financial advisor, a man I'd worked with for 15 years. I asked him to look closely at what a default on that loan would mean for my retirement and what my options were. What Patricia told me was important. The co-signer agreement had a clause, one I'd insisted on during the original signing, that tied my guarantee to my continued financial relationship with the primary borrower. Specifically, any additional financial contributions I made strengthened my obligation. Any withdrawal of planned contributions, documented in writing, could trigger a review of my standing. I had never made that $60,000 transfer. I want to be clear, I didn't start planning anything that night. I wasn't scheming. I was simply a 61-year-old man who'd just been told, very politely, that he wasn't the right kind of person to attend his own son's housewarming. I was processing that, and in processing it, I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. Over the next 6 weeks, I paid very close attention. I looked at Wesley and Tara's social media, which I'd mostly ignored before. What I found told a story. A trip to Scottsdale in August, a weekend in Vail in September, new outdoor furniture that I recognized from a high-end catalog, the Audi SUV apparently now joined by a leased truck in the driveway. I'm not a person who judges how people spend their money, but I was a cosigner on their mortgage. The spending patterns I was seeing were not the spending patterns of people with comfortable financial margins. I called Rick in Denver and asked, as casually as I could, what he knew about how Wesley and Tara were doing financially. Rick paused. They live big, he said. I figured they were doing well. What does Tara do again? Some kind of director role at a PR firm, although, actually, I think she may have changed jobs. Or left, maybe. I'm not sure. I called an old colleague of mine who knew people in the Denver business community. I didn't ask him to investigate anything. I just asked him to let me know if he heard anything relevant. 2 weeks later, he called me back. Tara had been let go from her firm in August, 2 months before the housewarming. She'd been offered a severance package in lieu of a performance review process. She was currently consulting, which in the language of corporate communications often means looking for work. They had thrown a housewarming party for their professional network, curated guests, while one of their 2 incomes had already disappeared, and they had not told me. I drove to my bank the following Monday. I spoke with the loan officer who had originally processed the cosigner paperwork. I asked him, clearly and directly, what my exposure was if Wesley and Tara fell behind on payments. The answer was not good. I went home and called Patricia again. I told her about Tara's employment situation, about the spending patterns, about the fact that I'd never transferred the $60,000. I asked her what my options were. You can send a formal notice withdrawing the planned supplemental contribution, she said. That combined with the clause you insisted on, creates grounds for the bank to reevaluate the guarantee structure. It's not a clean exit. There's no clean exit from a cosign, but it significantly reduces your exposure. Do it, I said. She sent the letter the following week. I informed the bank directly, which started an underwriting review. I said nothing to Wesley. I waited. The call came on a Thursday morning in early December. I was in the garage changing the oil on the truck when my phone rang. It was Tara. Her voice was different from every other time I'd heard it. The precision was gone. She sounded like someone standing at the edge of something steep. The bank called, she said. They said there's a problem with the cosigner arrangement. Something changed. They're talking about triggering a review of the whole loan structure. I set down the oil pan slowly and wiped my hands on a shop rag. What kind of problem? I said. They said you filed some kind of notice about the supplemental funding. They want to reclassify the guarantee. If they reclassify, the loan terms change and we need to refinance at the current rate, which is, it's not good right now. We could lose the house. I didn't say anything. Did you file something? Her voice was rising now, the controls slipping. Did you actually do something to our mortgage? I withdrew a planned financial contribution, I said, which I'm legally entitled to do since I never made it. We were counting on that. Wesley told you we were counting on that. Wesley told me a lot of things, I said. He also forgot to tell me about the housewarming. Silence. That's what this is about, she said finally. A party. No, I said. That's not what this is about. I heard her put the phone down, heard voices in the background, heard what sounded like an argument beginning. Then Wesley was on the line. Dad. His voice was tight. What did you do? I protected myself, son. You could cost us our house? I know. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sorry about the decision. Because we had a party you weren't at? His voice broke slightly on the last word, and I caught something underneath the anger. Something that might have been shame. Because I co-signed a $340,000 loan for people who didn't think I was worth a phone call, I said. Because I had $60,000 ready to give you as a gift, and the first I heard about your housewarming was from Rick. Because I've been your co-signer, your handyman, your financial backstop, and apparently not your family. He didn't answer right away. You should have told me you were upset, he finally said. I'm telling you now. The call ended without resolution. I went back to the truck. I finished the oil change, cleaned up the garage, made myself lunch. The afternoon was quiet in the way that quiet gets when something significant has just shifted. Wesley showed up at my door 2 days later. He hadn't called first, just drove 18 hours straight from Denver, which told me something about the state of things. He looked like he hadn't slept. He was wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn helping me fix the drainage problem 3 years earlier. And I don't know why that detail hit me the way it did, but it did. I let him in. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a while, neither of us said anything. The bank is willing to reclassify the guarantee if I reapply as sole borrower, he finally said. Our rate goes up about 2%. The payment goes up $412 a month. That's manageable, I said. It's manageable if Tara gets work soon. He looked at his coffee, which she's working on. I know about the job, Wesley. He looked up. Not surprised exactly. More like someone who'd known the moment of reckoning was coming and had just stopped dreading it. She was going to tell me, he said. It wasn't convincing. I'm not angry about the job, I said. People lose jobs. That's life. I'm angry that you were willing to let me carry that risk without telling me. I'm angry that I found out about my own son's housewarming from my nephew. I'm angry that I've watched myself become someone you call when you need something and schedule around when you don't. He put both hands around his coffee mug, his mother's hands. I'd always noticed that. The housewarming was Tara's idea, he said quietly. The guest list was her idea. I should have pushed back. I didn't. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I looked out the window at the yard Norma and I had planted together, the maple tree we put in the corner when Wesley was 7, now thick and tall enough to shade half the lawn, because it was easier not to, he finally said, because I'd gotten into this habit of choosing the path that kept everything smooth, and that path usually meant going along with what Tara wanted, and what she wanted was to separate our life out there from everything back here, including me, including you. He said it plainly without excuse, and that plain honesty cost him something. I could see it. Your mother would have had something to say about that. He almost smiled. She would have said it directly to Tara. She would have. We sat there for a while. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the cedar of the woodpile I'd brought in that morning. Ordinary smells, safe ones. I'm not asking for the money back, Wesley said eventually. I'm not asking you to change anything with the bank. I wanted to explain and to tell you that you were right. Not about everything, maybe, but about this. It's a start, I said. He stayed 2 nights. The first evening, we ordered pizza and watched a football game, barely talking, just being in the same room in a way we hadn't been in years. The second day, we worked on the back fence that needed replacing. 3 sections that had been bothering me for a month. Wesley worked the way I'd taught him, methodically, without shortcuts. He'd retained that. When he left, he shook my hand at the door and then pulled me into a hug, the kind that lasts longer than politeness requires. I'm going to do better, he said. I know you will, I said, because you're here. What came after wasn't a clean resolution. Life doesn't do those. The bank completed their reclassification, and Wesley refinanced at the higher rate. He and Tara went through what he later described as the hardest 3 months of their marriage. Tara found contract work in January, then a full-time position in March at a smaller firm. They stopped leasing the second vehicle. Wesley told me, without being asked, that they'd sat down and actually looked at their finances together for the first time. He called me every Sunday in January, every single one. In February, he called on a Wednesday evening. No occasion, nothing to ask for, just to talk. He told me about a patient his company had just landed, a school district in rural Colorado. He was excited about it in the way he used to be excited about things before he got concerned with appearances. I sat in my kitchen and listened and thought, there he is. I still have the $60,000. In March, I drove out to Denver. First time since that Christmas 3 years earlier. Wesley and Tara met me at the door together. Tara was different, not transformed, not pretending, just different, quieter, less performed. She showed me around the house, which was genuinely beautiful, and she thanked me for the work I put into co-signing without any of the condescension I'd heard in her voice before. It wasn't a perfect moment. There were things between us that still had distance to cover. But she thanked me, and she meant it. That evening, the three of us sat on the back porch they'd finished in the fall. The mountains were visible on the horizon, and it was cold but clear. Wesley grilled steaks, my recipe, the one his mother had made him learn before he left for college. Tara poured wine. We talked for 3 hours about nothing important. The neighborhood, their neighbor's dog, the project I was thinking about taking on in the spring. At one point, Tara got up to bring a jacket from inside, and it was just Wesley and me in the dark for a minute looking at the mountains. I want to tell you something, he said. Okay. When you pulled back the guarantee, when I found out what you'd done, my first reaction was that you'd betrayed me, that you'd used money as a weapon the way I'd always promised myself I'd never do. I know, I said, but then I sat with it, and I realized you hadn't used money as a weapon. You just stopped absorbing the cost of being treated like you didn't matter. He paused. There's a difference. I looked at him. This man who had Norma's eyes and my hands and 36 years of history between us. Yeah, I said, there is. Tara came back out with 3 jackets, one for each of us, and handed mine to me without a word, and we sat out there until it was too cold to stay, and then we went inside. The $60,000 is still in the account. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. Some of it might go to Norma's memorial fund at our church. Some of it I might keep for myself. A trip somewhere, maybe. Something Norma and I always talked about and never got to. Some of it might go to Wesley someday, when the moment is right and when it means something other than a transaction. But not yet. What I learned, what this whole long, painful year taught me, is something I wish I'd understood earlier, something I could have saved us both some hurt by knowing. You cannot love someone into valuing you. You can sacrifice, give, show up, co-sign, drive 18 hours, and plant maple trees in the yard, and if a person has learned to see you only as a resource, your generosity just confirms the lesson. The only thing that changes that equation is withdrawal. Not cruelty, not revenge for its own sake, just the simple, clear-eyed decision to stop funding a version of yourself that you don't recognize and that doesn't deserve what you got. Wesley is learning to be my son again. I am learning to be a father who requires something in return for his love. Not money, not status, not access to a curated housewarming party. Just presence. Just the ordinary, consistent proof that I matter to the people I've spent my life for. Norma would say that's not too much to ask. She'd be right. I've thought a lot about what actually happened over that year. Not the events themselves, but the mechanics underneath them. The cause and the effect. Because there was a logic to all of it, even when it hurt too much to see clearly. What I did for Wesley over 30 years wasn't wrong. Working overtime, co-signing the loan, showing up every time he called. None of that was a mistake. The mistake was quieter and harder to name. It was the habit of absorbing the cost of being undervalued and calling it love. Every time I excused a skipped Sunday call. Every time I told myself Tara just needed time to warm up. Every time I drove 18 hours and came home without saying what I'd actually felt. I was teaching both of us something false. I was teaching Wesley that he could have my full investment without offering anything in return. And I was teaching myself that keeping the peace was worth more than keeping my dignity. Neither of those lessons served either of us. The housewarming wasn't the injury. It was just the moment I finally stopped pretending the injury wasn't there. What I've come to understand is that the choices we make about how we allow ourselves to be treated are not passive. They're active. Every time I accepted less than I deserved, I made a choice. And those choices accumulated into a situation, into a relationship where I was a resource with a phone number rather than a father with a seat at the table. That didn't happen to me. It happened because of choices I made and choices Wesley made, and yes, choices Tara made. Every person in that story was responsible for something. The withdrawal of the guarantee wasn't revenge. I want to be honest about that because it's easy to dress self-protection up as justice and feel righteous about it. What I did was simpler and less satisfying than revenge. I just stopped. I stopped absorbing the exposure. I stopped funding a dynamic that diminished me. And in stopping, I gave Wesley the one thing I hadn't been able to give him by staying, a real consequence. You cannot teach someone to value you by making yourself indispensable. That sounds counterintuitive, but I've seen it proven now in my own life. The more I gave without requiring anything in return, the less Wesley thought about what he was receiving. It was only when the giving stopped that he drove 18 hours to sit at my kitchen table and actually reckon with what he'd done. Norma used to say that the most important thing she ever taught Wesley wasn't any particular lesson. It was the example of two people who treated each other with consistent respect. She meant herself and me, and she was right. Somewhere along the way, after she was gone, I stopped modeling that. I let the standard slip because I was lonely and because his approval felt like a substitute for her presence. That's the part I carry. That's mine. The intelligence in any long relationship, a marriage, a friendship, a parent, and a child, is knowing the difference between patience and surrender. Patience waits for a person to become who you know they can be. Surrender just absorbs the damage and calls it unconditional. I confused the two for too long. Wesley is learning. So am I. And what I know for certain is this. The $60,000 in that account means more to me right now, sitting there untransferred, than it ever would have delivered on the day of a housewarming I wasn't invited to. That's not bitterness. That's just finally understanding what I actually have and what it's worth.